The FujiCast is an independent Loading Zone production.
Saturday, 23rd of May.
The FujiCast.
Hello, welcome to the FujiCast. At the weekend, today being a Saturday, it's a special guest day. Next week, Mullins talks to Bert Stefani. Although I was saying it the wrong way. How do you say it, Kev?
Bert Stefani.
The Fujifilm ex-photographer. But today, we're going to talk with Leonard Neumann, the South African photojournalist who's plied his storytelling craft now on 3 continents. And he's a big fan, Kev, of a photographer that you particularly like, called James Revilius. Yeah, he's a massive fan of James. But, that's what we're going to be talking about today with our very, very special guest that's... Oh, hang on. Sorry. Hold on, Kev. Hold on. Oh, what's that flying in? Oh, no, that's disgusting. Oh. It's on the desk.
Oh, she sent you something, hasn't she? Oh.
Oh,
it was enormous, I tell you.
That's horrible. What is that? You're probably thinking, what are they talking about? What was that noise? That noise, by the way, is not what we're just about to talk about. That was the famous helicopter beetle. I couldn't find the beetle noise that I needed for this particular one. It's the only one I could find. Last night, Kev, what sort of time was it? I got a picture quite late from your wife.
It was about midnight, quarter to midnight, something like that.
Yeah.
Gemma had just gone to bed. I was sorting the dogs out, and I followed her up, and there was so we used to have a tree in our garden that every year around about this time would get infested with maybugs, and maybugs are massive. I mean, they're as big as my head, and they're solid. They're indestructible. They're like those cockroach things, and they would fly at me in the garden, and they'd fly into my head.
Right.
They really hurt.
Right.
So in order to deal with that, I cut the tree down.
What? Because of this beetle?
Oh, they're horrible. So the tree went, and so did the flies, so did those bugs, until last night. And one came in through the bedroom window it was like a horse. Came through the window like a galloping horse, landed on the bed. I screamed. I went downstairs, told Albie he was sleeping with Gemma, and I went and slept in his bed.
Oh no, you let your wife sleep with the actual name of the... what have I got? I've got a message coming in. Hold on. She's just... Yeah. She said, he made me sleep in the beetle room. And, yeah, so look, she's listening to this. Be careful, because she's joining in.
Honestly, these things are huge, and I can't deal with things like that.
Do you know that the real name for it is a cockchafer?
A cockchafer?
Yeah.
God, that sounds even worse.
Yeah, mate. Well, yeah, I was going. Well, I wasn't sure.
I didn't want to sleep in bed with it.
I wasn't sure whether you'd recognised it, because I was going to say, was it a familiar beetle with a black thorax, rusty brown wing cases and brown legs, and characteristic antennae that fan out, or was it the hemolymph? Where the beetle's entire body contains the most poisonous animal contact toxin in the world called pederin, which is 12 times more poisonous than cobra venom. I'm sure you'd have chosen it was probably the second one, but the first one, the cockchafer or the maybug, is actually harmless, Kev. There's nothing.
No, not when it hits you on the head. It's not.
It can't do anything to you.
They fly at me like some kind of kids game. People throw them at me. Horrible things.
They grow to 30 millimeters, Kev. They're not that large.
No, this one was huge. It was as big as my hand.
Okay. Oh dear. I'm going to put you down there in the can't believe you played rugby pile. Nothing's safe in your house anymore. I get a report on it straight away from your wife.
Yeah, clearly.
Anyway, should we have a quick question, then we'll go into today's interview. One from a friend of the show, Emily Rainier. First of all, another massive thank you, chaps, for the last thousands of episodes. It does feel a bit like that, doesn't it? I can't tell you what a difference it's made over the last couple of months. I'd spent the last 2 years working my bottom off trying to get my wedding, family and birth photography business going alongside another day job. And COVID, well, that came in and truly bamboozled all my efforts to date. Still, same or worse for so many photographers out there, so we're indeed in the same boat, but your dailies have lifted my spirits. So she has a couple of questions. Number one, At which point do you think it's okay to start advertising for outdoor work again? I only shoot documentaries, so home sessions, no go for now. It's just that when I see local businesses propping up on my Facebook feed saying they're reopening, I can't help but feel it's all going back to normal a bit too soon. Last thing I want to do is give my potential customers the impression that getting back to work for me is more important than their safety. Haven't been too keen on the Doorstep initiative. I'll ask you about that in a second, Kev. As the idea of doing post-portraits gives me the heebie-deebie-deebies. What do you think, though? When can I start advertising for outdoor work?
Well, it's tough, isn't it? Because the message is quite confusing from the government. From old Boris and his team, in that, and I'm not knocking them because they can't possibly be. It's the first time anybody's ever had to do this, so I'm sure they're doing their best. But the message was quite confusing, along the lines of, if you can work at home, work at home. If you can't, go to work. And but don't go outside, and don't mix with people that you don't know, and all that kind of stuff. And that kind of left a lot of businesses like ours in limbo, as in, well, does that mean we can go and do photographs outside? Does it, what does it mean? There's no, and of course they can't legislate for every single type of business. They're not going to sit there and do daily briefings and say, right, number one, photographers, this is what you can do. Dentists, this is what you can do. Chiropodists, this is what you can do. Et cetera, et cetera. Other jobs do apply. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'm just waiting for a little bit more clarification. I agree with Emily. People do seem to. There's a lot of shops and clothes shops and everything are just going, we're just going to open.
Yeah.
And that, there seems to be a lot of that going on. The government don't seem to be saying don't do that. So is that normal? Is that right? Who knows? I suspect that the government, and I'm saying this with all my fingers crossed and touching wood and all that kind of stuff. I suspect the government feel that we're over the worst of it, and we do have to get going again. So maybe this is without them saying, I suppose maybe what they're doing is opening the gates of the shed with all the horses inside, but not slapping the horses on the butt and telling them to run out. They're letting the horses find their own way out of this open door.
I like your metaphors.
Yeah, that was a good one. That wasn't it? I was quite impressed with that. Yeah. Well, I couldn't think of the words for where do horses stay? What would you call that?
A barn. A stable.
Yeah. Stable. Yeah. Stable even. Yeah.
It was good apart from that glaring omission, but
yeah. So I don't know, Emily. I whatever you feel comfortable with, I suppose, ultimately is the thing at the moment.
How are you doing with have you done some doorstep portraits yet?
No, we're starting this week because on that point I didn't want to kind of jump the bullet and jump the gun and start doing this project without the guidance of the council and everything. And up until this week, it was certainly a case of you shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be standing on people's doorsteps and taking pictures, because we spoke to them and that was their guidance. But that's presumably relaxed because the charity we're speaking to have said that they've spoke to the council and it's fine as long as we're socially distanced, etc. So yeah, hopefully this coming week we'll start. We're gonna tread the streets of Malmesbury, take some doorstep photos.
Do the good people of Malmesbury know you're on the way, Kev?
Yeah, well, we set up a page, and Jessica, who's an old wedding client of mine, in fact, from years and years and years ago, is kind of taking the reins on that, and so she's going to organise the routes and all that kind of stuff, and we're just going to do it. We're going to stick the pictures online. People can have the digital pictures, of course, no charge or anything like that, but if they want, they can make a donation to the local food bank.
Oh, good. Okay.
And that's it. It's not about making money. It's about community spirit.
It is. Emily, as well, thank you very much for your question about the interviewing. She said some nice things about the interviewing that's happened on the show. Yada, yada, yada. I'll do the yada, yada, yada on that one. But she said, what do you like when you get back inside the house, Neil, after doing your interviews? After you spend all those hours prepping, asking and listening, is your listening still good enough? Or do you say, Sam, talk to the hand, my ears are knackered? I can personally, this is Emily's words, she says, I can personally only cope with 30 seconds of my husband telling me about his working day before I start thinking about needing to hang out the washing. So what's it like when you spend your work day listening? I've got to admit, Emily, I'm dreadful when I get back to that house. And sometimes it is, give me some silence. But you like your silence as well, don't you? Yeah,
I'm good in my own company for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do. Gemma listens to the podcast, as you know, all the way through, and she kind of draws up a list of all of the things that I said wrong or made mistakes. Or you sounded like a right idiot when you said that kind of thing.
Do you listen to that?
We have many conversations.
Do you listen to it, or do you argue about that?
she'll say, "It's a stable, you stupid boy. It's a stable."
I knew that, Mullins. Why did? Yeah, I can hear her. Yes, I can hear her. Anyway, look, let's do today's interview. Let's meet Leonard Neumann. He's a tremendously talented observer of people. And I know that as we go through this interview, you're going to be scribbling like mad because he mentions an awful lot of photography names. Don't worry, don't do that. Just listen, because what we'll do is we'll put all these names in the show notes with some website links so that you can go and devour their work a little bit later on. So let me introduce you to the amazing photographer called Leonard Neumann. So, Leonard, 50 years of observing and photographing everyday life in South Africa and the States and France and England. We couldn't begin to do that complete justice in a relatively modest-sized interview, but I am intrigued to know the very roots of your photography before we go further. Where did it all start? Why the style of photography as an observation? What inspired you?
You know what? Probably the thing that most inspired me was that book that came out, The Family of Man. And I can even at 68 years old, I can vividly remember seeing that book about 60 years ago and paging through it and seeing the beauty of it, not only like the Margaret Burke White and all the great names, but the unknown photographers. You know, it just opened up a whole new world to me, that photography was more than just happy snaps, pictures at the beach, and so on. And I think what I also got from that, for me, there always had to be, and I'm sure that you've looked at my work and looked at my website.
I have, yeah.
There have to be, I would say 99% of the images that I've taken have had people or dogs in them. Yeah. I like to walk the streets and see the theater and the magic that's in front of one every day.
It's this thing about dogs as well. I mean, Elliot Erwitt obviously has a thing for dogs. And you on your website, you actually have its own section devoted to dogs.
Yes, and I don't, if you looked at it sort of deeply, you'd notice that there are no photographs or portraits of dogs. Primarily, they're just dogs in everyday life.
That's right.
Mean, the picture of the man on Goulburn Road sitting in his truck with the dog in the background, the fellow in Paris talking to his dog outside of Café de Flore. Funny that you should have mentioned Elliot Erwitt. The iPad is propped up on Elliot Erwitt's dogs. I'm a huge fan of Elliot Erwitt. In fact, I did go on a course in New York many, many years ago, and he was one of the speakers.
Wow.
It was quite enlightening and very funny indeed.
Tell me about your dad, because it was his Leica 3 that you inherited, wasn't it?
You know, I must be honest with you. It was my dad's Leica 3, and prior to that, it was a camera, a little bellows camera called an Exacta, also a 35. But my dad wasn't a photographer at all, other than, as I said, photographs at the beach and a couple of family snaps. He just happened to, I don't even know how he came across that Leica. I think it was given to him by a friend who didn't use it, but it was a 3C, and I started using that when I was about 14 or 15, because he had passed away then, and I didn't even know that that Leica was any different from anything else. But it kind of got me going.
Well, started your love affair with that camera as well. We'll come back. We'll come back to the camera in a short while. So did you then start sort of consuming as much of that style of photography as you possibly could? I mean, were you a great reader of National Geo or Life or those kind of publications?
Oh, definitely. Life. We did have Life. We had a subscription to Life. We had a National Geographic subscription as well. So that obviously. I mean, I can't say I'm really conscious of that early influence, but it was there, obviously it was there.
Well, let's move around the world a little bit before we get to England, because you moved around the world. Went from South Africa, you went to America. It seemed that you found these sort of new geographic inspirations with each of your moves, such as, Gary Winogrand in America. It's almost like you sort of immerse yourself in their photographic culture.
Yeah, I think when I was in America, my style was a lot harder. The streets are harder. The light, say, is more contrasty in the big cities because of skyscrapers and stuff like that. And the American photographers in general have got a little bit more, I think, like attitude. Gary Winogrand, Leonard Freed, people like that, certainly Robert Frank, who's an absolute hero of mine, Meyerowitz, all those guys, huge influence on me, huge.
But you feel it was a much harder style of photography?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's interesting, because I spoke to Fran May about her work after moving from Canada to here in the 70s, and she mooted that her work became somewhat darker by experience, and where there was lots of space and the light. And I know you love the light in America, but the light that she had in Canada, now she was in steel towns, and it was more dour and harder, and so she went the other way. She went the other way to you, funnily enough. Whereas it's been mooted that your work became softer when you got to the UK.
Oh, absolutely. Over here, I find that the English photographers, whether it's conscious or not, there's a lot of humor in English photography. If you have a look at someone like Dapper Jones, who's remarkable. He speaks a totally different language, or Tony Ray Jones, or Homer Sykes again, Martin Parr. There's always a humorous kind of, it could be even, it's humorous, but it's biting at the same time,
So your style does change, does it? You see it alter as you cross time zones. Yeah.
There's absolutely no doubt that my style has become a little bit gentler. And in fact, when I send images to some of my friends in photography back in America, they say to me, "Oh, your stuff has gotten so much softer. What happened to you? your edge has been knocked off you. I
don't think you've lost your edge." So in America, then, what floated your boat, as to use a great British term?
Well, I always lived in big cities. So I lived in Boston. I spent a lot of time in New York, and I lived in Dallas for many years. I was always a photographer, but more as it was a secondary profession. I had exhibitions. However, I did have a regular day job in order to pay the rent.
Yeah.
The streets. The street in New York is phenomenal. There's something happening all the time. There's this theater. There's movie happening in front of you. Texas is different. Texas is very different. You can't be out on the street as such. You have to, for instance, in New York, there's sidewalks, and you can walk around. In Dallas, you can't walk around. There are no sidewalks. Everybody's house goes directly onto the street, the lawn. So you go to places like you go to rodeos and cattle shows and things like that to take photographs. But the street for me in Boston and New York was the magic.
In terms of the way you shoot, the style that you shoot, I know that you're more of a quality than quantity person, and probably that's a result of having shot film for all that time. I don't think you describe yourself as the most prolific worker in terms of the amount that you have to achieve every time you go out.
Well, obviously we're all thriving for that shot all the time. I think with film, I was a lot more economical. A roll of Tri-X is $6 now, and then the processing and all that. So I was more focused, I think, than when I was shooting film. Now that I'm shooting a lot of digital, I'm as focused, but I'm taking more chances. I try to pretend that when I'm shooting digitally, it's as if I was shooting film. I never look at the screen at the back of the camera afterwards. I saved that for later. And I am quite disciplined, I must admit.
Now let's travel back from America to the UK over to your European moves. What brought you from America to the UK then?
You know, my wife and myself, we came out here for a family function. My wife, as I said, I was born in South Africa. My wife is from Colorado. I met her in Texas. We came here for a family function. And going back to the airport, she said, I want to live in England. I said, you've got to be kidding me. And 3 years later, she had regraduated as a solicitor from being a lawyer in America. And here we are in London, and we couldn't be happier. It's fabulous.
How long have you been here now?
We've been now, I think, about 14 and a half years.
Yeah. So in terms of the Brits then, you'd come from America and the style of photography that you were talking about in America. When you came over then, did you think, well, these people are more eccentric, or is there something about the Brits? Well, I'm wondering if it trained your lens in a different direction. It sounds like it did.
Absolutely. But, you know, more than looking at the British people and saying, well, they're more eccentric, I just had to look at people like Tony Ray Jones and Homer and, Paddy Summerfield, Martin Parr.
Yeah.
And I think I learned more about the British people from them. I'm a voracious reader of photography books. I've probably got 500-600 here in my house.
Word.
So I think the live exposure to the British quirkiness, the delightful quirkiness, was preceded by looking at the work of Tony Ray Jones and Homer and Dafford Jones and people like that. Just to put it into perspective, in New York, you'd see somebody who's slightly off-kilter, slightly quirky, eccentric, and he's crossed the road. Over here, invariably, he's probably your friend or your neighbor. The English celebrate that. They celebrate the difference, whereas I think the Americans avoid it.
Yeah, there's a name you didn't mention in there, and I know you're a fan of him, James Revilius. Is that down to his sort of mild manner? Because George Coles on your website describes you as charming, and I think you've got a very generous way. Well, maybe it's a generous of spirit picture-making style that you have, and I think James had that, didn't he?
Oh, without a doubt. James, did you ever see the BBC documentary that Alan Bennett narrated? I think it was called The English Eye.
I think I've seen bits of it, because my co-presenter Kevin went to interview James's wife. And I'm reading the book at the moment.
Yeah. James Revilius is just a giant. He deserves way more recognition. James will appeal to photographers and students of photography, people that have studied the craft. He won't appeal to somebody who's not into photography or pick up a book and say, what is this drab black and white stuff? But it's just, the man had the most exquisite, soft, gentle eye out of everybody. I mean, he's one of the English greats, without a doubt.
And he also managed to find particular characters and follow through with their story, rather than visit them, sort of raid them for the picture and the story and then move on. He stuck with a story, didn't he?
Oh, absolutely. He went back and back and back to photograph these people. But, the beauty for me of James Revilius is that he just had this singular vision. I'm going to photograph Devon, the people probably within 20 miles of where he lived. And he dedicated his life. He thoroughly photographed them, Yes, there are other James Revilius photographs from outside of Devon, but primarily I would assume that 85% of the work that he did was all farm and village life in Devon.
Well, he has a very, very familiar style, and I know that from having studied his work. If you had to describe your style, Leonard, I mean, I've already started really charming, generous of spirit, mild-mannered. I mean, even your portraits of rage on your website are reasonably gentle in their approach.
Did you like that?
I do, yeah. I mean, when I saw portraits of rage, I thought, well, that doesn't sound like Leonard. And actually, if you delve in, I don't want to spoil it because I want people to go and look for themselves. But as you delve in, you'll find out exactly what I mean. What is your approach? How would you describe your approach?
I want to see the best in people, number one. I don't want to take advantage of people. As you say, George Coles or Andrew Shaler said, I have a soft touch, that's what I want. That's what I'm after. You'll never find a photograph that I've taken of a homeless people, somebody who's fallen through the cracks, somebody who's dependent on drugs or alcohol. That's not my bag. I want to see the best in them, and I want to see the quirkiness.
Yeah.
So that my approach is very soft. Looking around, I mean, London is. I know it's jaded. People say, you go to Portobello Road or you go to Petticoat Lane. I've got some of the most exquisite stuff that I think from these areas, just people in the streets. That's, I don't know if I'd call myself a street photographer, but as I say, I just want to be soft. I want to be like James Revilius one day when I grow up.
I think you're there, Leonard, really. What makes a good picture of the ordinary? I mean, there is this huge following for wide-angle, in-your-face, intrusive stuff. That's not your style. We know that. It's obvious.
No.
But so what makes a good picture of the ordinary? I mean, you've mentioned humour. That would definitely be one of them.
I would say certainly composition. Good tones. Good tones are very important to me. Now, I used to be, when I was in America, my tones were much harsher. Yeah. Now I'm more after the sort of the James Revilius type of tones, the more greys,
And do you communicate happily with your subjects, or do you prefer to sort of phase in and fade in and out of their life?
Firstly, with the sort of the loose street stuff, that's just hanging around and taking a photograph, a snap here and there. If it's a portrait, invariably I will ask a street portrait. I will say to someone, would you mind if I took a photograph? And if they say to me, yes, great, I shoot one. Or if they say to me, no, then I walk on, However, if they say to me yes, and this is a trick that I'm sure a lot of people do, is that once I've got their permission, I'll pretend to take a photograph, or I'll take a photograph, and then invariably their guard will come down, and that's when you get the true street portrait.
Yeah.
when the person feels at ease. It's that second shot or that third shot.
So let's look in Leonard Neumann's camera bag for a moment. I often get reminded I should ask a little bit more about kit, and you've been very faithful to your trusty Leicas, I know, but it's not something you obsess about. I read that you don't really hoard kit, and I'm unlikely to find shelf loads of cameras with all those books you own. There probably isn't room anywhere. What do you have?
The only Leica that I have left, I have a broken M3 that's lying in some place in America, and an M6. Yeah. The others I got, the early digital ones I kind of got rid of. Today, I know that you're fond of Fuji cameras, and I've got a couple of these Fujis. I've got a one which is an X100, which I bought for £80 over here. I mean, the thing is remarkable. It's absolutely incredible. I have an X Pro 1, again, cheapest chips now, because there are a lot of people today who they always want the latest stuff. Believe me, anything more than 12 megapixels for the kind of work that I do is wasted, quite frankly.
We know the fascinating thing is, when the X100 came out, my mother had passed away and left some money. I think these two time periods coincide. I'm sure they do. I bought myself a Leica M8 because I thought, it's the kind of thing I wouldn't necessarily have gone out to purchase. I was a Canon shooter at that time anyway, really. Uh-huh. And I thought I've always wanted a Leica, and the M8 was the camera. When I compared it to the X100, it wasn't as good as a sensor, but there was a feeling of using it, and I'm not sure if that's an over-romanticized feeling. But if I took that brand from you, what would happen to your photography?
That's an interesting one. I think it would. I mean, if you took away a small camera, if you could reframe, you took away a small camera like an M6, like an X100 or an X Pro 1, and put a big Canon or a big Nikon or something in my hands, I think I would lose my touch somewhat.
Why?
Because it's cumbersome. It's people will notice it. I can take this little X100 and put it in F8 and get a halfway decent reading off of the ground, what shutter speed it should be. And I can go and just mingle, and whereas I'd have and take images, but I'd have a huge problem doing that with a big fat Nikon. Although I do have a Mamiya 7, which is a rangefinder, medium format, which I do love shooting with.
It's a couple of years since Lens Less Ordinary, which was your Leica store exhibition.
Yes.
Are you a printer still?
Not anymore. When we left America, I gave the darkroom to the high school across the street from where we lived. I've hired a darkroom over here on a couple of occasions, but it doesn't work out economically. If I do need if I have somebody who needs a silver print, there's a lady, Barbara Wilson, that I use. Mm-hmm. But primarily now, I'm scanning my old negs, and obviously a lot of regular digital. But I'm not printing anymore. I do my own Photoshop work, and I use Photoshop, not Lightroom. Because I started on early Photoshop, and I'm just quite familiar with it too. My workflow is very simple.
What is it then? What is your workflow? I'm intrigued.
Basically, in RAW, I'll if it's a color image from, let's say, from the Fuji or whatever, I'll go into RAW. I'll go pretty much into automatic, and then I'll see where it needs to go. Like I might add a little bit of black, boost the highlights, and then I just go into Photoshop. I'll convert into to gray, or I'll sometimes use this silver effects. People say to me, "You're mad. It's not pure," and that. It's wonderful. And it's very simple. I find with Photoshop, it's like cooking, I guess. You can keep adding a spice and a herb and a this and a that, and eventually you mess it up. I once spoke with a fellow in South Africa who's a Photoshop printer for all the great South African photographers. He does all the digital. And he made a very, very valid statement to me. I went to ask him, a couple of questions. He says, when you think you have it right, back off 5%. I went to a gallery once over here, and I was looking at a picture, and the owner of the gallery came up to me and said to me, "Have you ever seen a blue sky like this?" It was like a lapis blue. Yes. Have you ever seen? I said, "No," and that's the problem. It's I think people just do too much in Photoshop, especially with color stuff, and black and white. I think you can overdo it. Yeah. As I said earlier, I'm holding back a bit more. The James Revilius type tones. I don't know if you know that guy Adams. I think his name is Robert Adams. A new topography photography out of Colorado. The tones were just nice and gentle. Now, listen, there are some photographs that demand harshness, but overall, I just see these things that it's too forced for me.
Yeah, I think the harshness is also how you mentally feel about, and I use that word carefully as well, because listeners to this show will be well aware of my absolute love affair with the photography of Don McCullin. But I'm not just talking about obviously the obvious stuff and the time he spent in war, and also this is England, all those amazing pictures shot in this country. But I keep coming back to his latest work, the landscape work, which is very dark, very dramatic, and is a statement of him in every way, shape, and form, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Don McCullin was, he wrote the book. When it comes to that, especially the conflict photography, there's Don McCullin, and then there's everybody else. The guys is a completely different level. Yeah. Those dark, heavy, inky prints. I'm sure you saw the stuff at the Tate.
I absolutely did. Yeah.
It suited the work. Yeah. Some people didn't like. For me, it suits. Look at the subject matter. War is dark. But then of course the landscapes, they're moody, they're cloudy. If you had to have sort of Ansel Adams type tones in that work, I don't think it would work, quite frankly. I think that black inkiness is wonderful in his work.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Leonard. I don't feel
fabulous.
I don't feel I know you well enough yet to call you Lenny, although I know that in all your PR it says Leonard Lenny Neumann. But yeah. I do want to know when the next exhibition is.
I don't know. I wish. I would have thought that right now, during this terrible time that we're all going through, the entire world, it would have given me a chance to maybe go through my archives, see what I've got. I need something different. I've had the one at the Leica Gallery over here in town, which was it really went wonderfully. I've had an exhibition in Dallas with cowboys. I've got to go through and find. I am working on something, and I've been working on it for a long time. That's called People in Parks, and there's a snippet of it on my website.
There is. Yes, I did. Yeah.
And it's another thing that I'm enamored with in this country are parks, and people use parks a lot in this town. Whether it's on your way walking through the park to the city, I think that might be the next one that I do. I'm trying to shop it around, but I've got a lot more editing to do.
My thanks to Leonard Neumann for his time with the interview this week. And as I said before, yes, all the links will be on the website, FujiCast.co.uk, under this particular episode, so that you can go enjoy the photographers his work, of course, but also the photographers that he talked about. And that's it. Anything else today before we disappear? For
one last thing, one last little bit of housekeeping for all of our friends of the show.
Right.
You may have seen in the FujiCast Facebook group, those of you that are there, but those of you who aren't there is such a thing called the British Podcast Awards. Now, without encouraging you too much, although secretly we are, it would be amazing if you went to britishpodcastawards.com/vote, and in there you can vote for your favourite Listener's Choice Award. Doesn't have to be us, of course, could be any podcast you listen to. Although if you vote for another podcast, don't ever come back here.
Kev, you're not supposed to say that.
Yeah, you can. I checked the T's and C's. It says you can be aggressive.
I'm sure it didn't.
BritishPodcastAwards.com/vote. You can choose us or the Archers. I'm voting for the Archers.
Right, tomorrow we have Ask Andreas, The Return. It's a very, of course, it's a very Fujifilm biased show tomorrow. But even if you don't shoot Fuji, I think there will be some surprises in there for you. So that's tomorrow's show. See you later, Kev.
Bye-bye.
The FujiCast is an independent Loading Zone production.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.